I think for me, this was the thing that like punched me right in the heart.
Did you catch that the first time you watched that? Or?
Using the old noggin. People will just tell you their secrets and you didn't even ask them to. They just put them on your lap. Ugh, I don't want to cry. No more crying on the channel. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist and we talk about therapist-y things on this channel. Today is a little different. Obviously the background is all new. This is the same space. We just painted the wall and like renovated the space a little bit. Don't worry, the artwork of, or the wall of shitty art is coming back. I just haven't hung it up yet because there's a lot of it. So that's going to be here probably for the next video, but there will be old footage and new footage sort of like mixed in and out. So like, don't be alarmed. We're just like in transition. Hopefully eventually it will all be the same, but for now it's a little different. Thanks for bearing with us. Today, I mean, you clicked on the video, you know, but we're talking about Encanto. I'm super excited. I saw this request a little while ago and I saw that this was like trending. Lots of people are talking about this. And so I was like, sure, great. I'll talk about this. This should be easy. I'll just watch it. I'll sit down. It'll be no big deal. I'll watch this like Luca or like some other Disney movie. And then we'll just chat about it and it'll be a super easy video. Not the case. I got punched in the gut emotionally. So we have a lot to talk about today. Before we get into it though, I want to give a brief disclaimer. I, as an individual, as a human being, grew up in a Mexican household, and so I resonated with the story in the film on a personal level. And so while we are talking about it today from a therapy perspective, and I'm talking about it as a professional and a clinician, it's impossible for me to erase my lived experience. And so there are parts of me that resonated with the movie and the film on a personal level. And I feel like that's just an important disclosure for you guys to know. I really do my best to make unbiased and objective content on this channel, but sometimes we have intersection and this is just one of those moments. So know that going in. I don't want to invalidate anybody's perspectives or feelings or opinions about the film, but I do want to get into the nuance and kind of talk about some of the stuff that I noticed. So take that for what you will. One other brief disclaimer, because this is a Disney movie and I'm not trying to get shot into the center of the sun with copyright claims and like legal mumbo jumbo, unfortunately there's not going to be any like footage of the film. It's just simply an unrealistic expectation that I can include footage of the film. Disney will have my ass if I try to reproduce any level of that film, especially because it's new and it's trending. So like, that's not happening today. We might use a couple of stills and things like that, but if you haven't seen the film, you want to watch it, it's on Disney Plus. I would highly encourage anyone who's interested in that to go watch it. Also, spoilers, obviously, if you haven't seen the film, don't watch this unless you're okay with their, like the ending and like lots of the twists and stuff being spoiled. Okay, that's all the disclaimers. I think that's all the things. Let's just get into it. Also, shout out to Human Bean for my bucket of coffee. Okay, I want to talk about each individual family member because I think the film warrants that. And for my brain, this was just the easiest way to break stuff down. And we're gonna go oldest to youngest because I think that made the most sense. So first and foremost, let's talk about Abuela. She doesn't actually have any powers, but she is like the candle holder and like the family matriarch, and is like sort of the, not like the disperser of magic, like the magic does that, but she is very much, like they actually referred to this in one of the songs, Abuela runs this show. Let's be clear, Abuela runs this show. She's very much like this sort of overseer for the family and like generally seen as like the lady, like she's very much in charge of who does what. It goes without saying that she has survived some really horrific shit and been traumatized to a pretty high degree, and I really appreciated the way that they handled portraying this in the film, because I think generally this is very delicate subject matter to not digress, not divest, dissect, to dissect family roles and how like family culture works, but also to sort of weave trauma and generational trauma in there. It's a very touchy issue, and so I thought they handled this really well. One of the things that I wanted to note about her character and the way that they portray her is that she, like I said, has survived some really horrific stuff, but it also seems like she at the time didn't have the language or the understanding to really express or communicate that that's what had happened to her, or like had the ability to process that on her own time. Which is very much the case a lot of times for trauma that has happened over the course of somebody immigrating, or being forced to flee, or like seek refugee status or something like that. There's not really a lot of time to like pause and process and reflect about how that's impacted you, the way that it's affected you. And so I think they did a really good job of portraying how this manifested in her being an anxious person and projecting that onto her family members without recognizing that that's what she was doing. A lot of the statements that she makes are seemingly innocuous. Is that the word? Googling that. Pause. I was right. Yeah, a lot of the statements that she makes are seemingly innocuous, like saying that the family will do their best to earn the miracle that somehow found them, that they want to like give back to the community and those types of things. But I thought this was an interesting way to sort of reveal the perspective that she has about the miracle and the magic and the Encanto that like affects their family, because it's very much this energy of like, we don't deserve this, and so we need to do everything that we can to be exceptional and to be special and to be deserving of this thing and to prove to everybody around us that we're not like fucking off with this special gift. And again, this expectation and this anxiety gets projected onto her family members without her necessarily realizing that that's what she's doing, I think. This is also, I think, a moment or like a theme that a lot of people who come from immigrant families really resonated with, because this is a very common issue. And we're going to talk about this more a little bit later, but this feeling of like, my family has survived really horrific and scary and traumatizing things just to give me life or to like give me the ability to be alive is a lot for a person to shoulder. And so oftentimes there is this feeling and this pressure to be exceptional all the time. And I think Abuela's character does a really good job of humanizing that, which, as a side note, I really appreciate what Disney is doing in not casting like sort of caricature villainous roles anymore. Everybody in the film has like kind of toxic traits a little bit, and I appreciate that they just humanize this, and it's not like, you know, the sort of Ursula or Jafar thing, because I also think that sort of lends itself to racism too, but that's another topic for another time. But I appreciate that we are not leaning so heavily into this like one person being single faceted and always bad, but more so like humanizing the negative traits that some people sometimes have. And I thought this was also a very culturally sensitive way to talk about this issue, because like I said, this is a very delicate issue. And I think it's very important to note here that recovering from trauma sometimes is a privilege and not an opportunity or something that everybody has the resources to do. And so Abuela's character arc, where she's able to recognize the way that she's harmed her family and the way that she's harmed her relationships with her family, is wonderful, and I think really healing. Was very cathartic for people to see. But I appreciate that they didn't present it in a way as if this is like a must do to be a good person. Like, you can do both. You can be a good person and also behave in ways that are unacceptable, inappropriate, traumatizing, like all of that stuff. We're going to talk more about that later, but for now, I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts and feelings about Abuela. And we're going to talk more about like the general family themes in a minute. For now, let's talk about Tia Pepa. My Tia Pepa, her mood affects the weather. She's one of my favorites. I love her. I think her character is like a pretty upfront attempt to display a family member with mental illness. I've seen a lot of speculation online about Disney's attempts, or I guess whoever the originator of the film, their attempt to portray a person with an anxiety disorder, which I think is also valid and potentially true. But to me, I read it more as like general mental illness, because Abuela very much pushes the people in the family during the course of the film to, the phrase that I grew up with was like, we don't air our dirty laundry. And I think it's very much that energy of like, we have to keep up appearances and not show people any of the flawed or less than perfect things that are happening behind closed doors. And for Pepa, this is a problem, because she literally wears her emotions on her outside. And so we see repeatedly throughout the film her doing this thing where she's like, clear skies, clear skies, clear skies, clear skies. And like trying really hard to suppress the emotions so that her family members don't go, Pepa, what are you doing? You're Pepa, calm down. You're tornading the flowers, or like you're raining all over everybody. And I think the impact of that is that it makes her more anxious. And we actually see a moment too, which I appreciated, where her son is trying to soothe her and is sort of like placed into this role of like parentified child and like trying to soothe his parent because of this pressure and this expectation to like keep it together. Like, don't let anybody see what's happening. We can't let anybody know that we're having negative emotions. The other thing that was notable about this, I think, is that throughout the film, like I mentioned, we see repeatedly her being chastised by her family, particularly by Abuela, for being emotional and for affecting the family with her emotions.
Pepa, you have a cloud.
I know.
But we don't see anybody ask her, like, hey, are you okay? Like, why are you feeling a way that's causing you to tornado the flowers or like to rain all over everybody? Like, what's happening? Are you okay? Can we help you? Very much the energy is just like, that's inconvenient for us. We don't like it, so stop it. And it does seem like it breeds this energy of shame and guilt, and just further perpetuates the anxiety, which then causes her to be more emotional, and it's like very cyclical in this way. The other thing that's noteworthy here that seems to be a theme that runs throughout the family members, despite whatever, regardless of what their gifts are, is this attitude of appreciation for the gifts that they've been given, unless the gifts are inconvenient or unless the gifts cause the family to be perceived in at all a negative light by the people in the community. And then we don't like that. You need to like fucking tuck that shit away, hide that in a box, and like push it out of the field of view of anybody outside of the family, especially because we only want the gifts to be a blessing and of use to people. And they actually talk about this later in the film. There's like some conversation that's had about how, the miracle is not your gift, it's you. And in the beginning part of the film, we see this attitude of like, your gift is the special thing about you, and so your gift better be useful or helpful to us, and if it's not helpful to us, we don't like that, which feels very exploitative. We're going to talk about it anyways. The next person that I want to talk about is Julietta, whose power is healing with food.
And that's why Mom Julietta, here's her deal. Whoa! The truth is she can heal you with a meal.
This again is like a pretty blatant attempt to portray the family role of being the healer or the fixer or like the peacekeeper. This is like, again, like pretty transparently represented in her powers, but also I think in her interactions with family members, she is always the person who intervenes, especially with Abuela. When Mirabel is being like yelled at or chastised, she tells her like, be nice to Mirabel, like you're always yelling at her. At the end of the film, we see her tell Bruno, when he's trying to apologize to everybody, like, hey, we're just happy that you're here.
Hey, we're just happy that you're here, okay?
And like very much this attempt to like smooth it over, don't talk about it, like cut it, like please stop making a scene. Like let's just sort of smooth it over and not talk about it. I saw a couple of people online remark about her lack of personality. We're doing laundry, so sorry if you heard that. I saw a couple of people online remark about her lack of personality, but I kind of wonder if this was intentional, because this is a very common thing that we see for people who occupy this role within family systems, is this air of invisibility. In order to be the family healer, the expectation is oftentimes that you fix things behind the scenes and that you're not taking up too much space. It's very much this energy of like, be useful and convenient to me when I need you, but otherwise disappear. Don't inconvenience me. Don't be in the way. Don't be too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't be noteworthy unless it's to fix things. And also, you're not going to be celebrated for fixing things, really. Which I guess to an extent, Julietta is like celebrated for fixing things. But I do kind of wonder if her lack of outward personality and expression is meant to be kind of a representation of how she is pressured to function within this family system. Because also too, we have this family where people have these very big gifts and they're like very big personalities and taking up a lot of space, and she seems very reserved for that reason. Like maybe there's just not a lot of space for her, and she isn't positively reinforced for fighting for the attention, and so she's just chosen not to. I don't really have a ton to say about her, but I did appreciate that they included this in the film, because I think they would have been remiss not to. But again, I think it was also just like a really nice way for them to handle a delicate issue there. Okay, so let's talk about Tio Bruno.
My Tio Bruno. We don't talk about Bruno.
His power is having visions of the future. And I thought his character was noteworthy for the reason that his power seems to be one of the only ones that's not like directly tied to his family role that they're trying to portray, other than like having green eyes, I guess, and like being sort of vaguely villainous in the beginning. He's kind of noteworthy and like unique in that way, but Bruno is like pretty blatantly an attempt to portray a black sheep or scapegoat role within the family. In family systems, when there is a black sheep or a scapegoat, we very much see this effort to shame and label them as like not one of us, and like you don't represent us. And like this happens in a very obvious way in the film, where Bruno is like sort of pushed but also chooses to leave for the sake of preserving the family reputation, because there is a lot of like negative opinion about his gift and his presence, and the way that he interacts with the community. The thing that I loved about Bruno and his character arc was that I think they portrayed him in a way that was like the perfect encapsulation of shame, not only in his behavior and his interactions with the family, but also like literally in the imagery that they use to describe him and to show him. He literally hides in the fucking walls with the rats. And so I think this is like such a perfect way to represent not only what it looks like when we shame ourselves, but also what it feels like to be shamed by ourselves, but also by other people. Very much this desire to hide, and to put it in the dark, and to not talk about it, not look about it. Like literally we don't talk about Bruno. And so I loved that they represented him in this way, and that his character arc sort of resolved in him being brought out into the light, and that the conflict was pretty easily resolved as a result of this. This is a thing that I tell my clients all the time, is that shame is very much, it's helpful to visualize it like bacteria. The more that we put it in the dark, dank, like moist, gross parts of ourselves, the more that it flourishes there, the more that it grows, and the more that it like prefers to be in that environment. The best way that you can deal with this is to bring it out into the light and to expose it. Shame has a lot of power over us when we try to hide it and we try to pretend like it's not happening. And the best way to find freedom from that is in being very open and honest about whatever it is that's causing you to feel shame. And we see this in the end with his character arc, where he like apologizes to everybody and they have a very open and honest conversation about all the conflict and all of the stuff. We find out actually that he is a very vocal supporter of Pepa feeling her emotions and being allowed to show up authentically, which I thought was a really cool moment. But I love his character, not only because his song is great, but also because I talk about shame a lot in the work that I do, and I thought this was a great way to sort of explain that concept and sort of show what that looks and feels like in real time. Another noteworthy thing about Bruno is the way that his gift affects the family. This is something that we talked about with Pepa, but very much this energy that because your gift doesn't always benefit the family. We see this in the song where Dolores talks about how the family is like fumbling with prophecies that they don't understand. And he's edged out. He's sort of pushed to the peripheral of the family, and he's not celebrated as a person who is helping to glorify the Encanto. And like, you're not helping our family. You're not helping us create this reputation of deserving the miracle that found us. And so like we don't like you, we don't like your gift, we don't like you, and like we don't really want you to represent our family. And I really appreciated that the film has this very clear arc where we see the change in the way that the family perceives each other, from being about what they do and how they are of service both to each other and to the community, to being about who they are as people and learning how to love and value each other as human beings and not for the things that they do. I think this is a very valuable lesson, both in our own self-esteem, but also in our familial relationships. I think especially in immigrant families, oftentimes there's this feeling, we're going to talk about this with Luisa too, but this feeling that if I am not being of service or I am not being helpful to the family unit, I have no value. And it's a very scary and shamey feeling that people can be eaten alive by. And so I love that the resolution in the film, spoiler, sorry, is in the family learning how to validate and value each other as human beings and as a family who has this shared experience and this love for one another, rather than in the ways that they are of service to themselves and to the community. So the next person that I want to talk about is Isabela, Señorita Perfecta.
Señorita Perfecta.
Whose gift is like making flowers happen. They literally refer to her as the golden child. Like, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that she is meant to portray this role of golden child within the family. They also literally call her Little Miss Perfect. But she talks about, in her song, but also in the film, this expectation to be perfect all the time. And that she never gets to be, just be. One of the things that stuck out to me about her character and her narrative in the film is that she is actually mad at her sister Mirabel for ruining her engagement to a man that she didn't even love because she wanted to marry him solely for the purpose of pleasing Abuela and for making the family happy.
Such a fine young man with our perfect Isabela.
If this doesn't encapsulate what it feels like to be the golden child, I don't know what does. There is very much this energy that she is willing to lay her life on the line and all of her happiness and her wants and needs on the line. She's willing to let go of it all if it means that she can make Abuela happy, if it means that she can make the family happy, and it will benefit the sort of like greater good of their family system. She talks about how this is a suffocating pressure for a person, and I think a lot of people resonated with her character for that reason, because when you are the golden child and you're put in this role of like being perfect all the time, failure feels terminal. This feels like a thing that's not even an option for you. And we see this in the rivalry between her and Mirabel, where she kind of is envious of her sister for getting to be a fuck up, kind of. And Mirabel is kind of jealous of Isabela for being this perfect child who's celebrated by the family all of the time. And I loved that their relationship and their rivalry was central to the plot of the film, because again, I think a lot of people resonated with this, but I also love that we got to air this out in the open, this idea that neither of these roles are fun. Neither of these roles are a happy thing to experience. But when you're on the other end of this, it feels very much like, I'd rather be that fucking person. I don't want to be in the role that I'm in because this is suffocating. This is terrible. This is lonely. And that's the thing that I wanted to talk about too with this film and all of the roles that are portrayed, is this overarching sense of loneliness that all of these characters seem to feel in shouldering this heavy burden alone, because there is very much this energy that like, we don't talk about things, we don't air this stuff out, and your family role has been decided for you, and like, deal with it. Because not only is there not space for you to talk about it because everybody else is like drowning with their own shit, but it's also frowned upon. There's a lot of shame and a lot of judgment for talking about these things. And I think especially in immigrant families, this is a pressure that we feel a lot, that like everybody has so much stuff going on and it's very overwhelming and everyone has been traumatized. And so like, who am I? Like, how dare I try to force someone else in my family system to hold space for me and my little problems, and like, boo-hoo, poor me, especially in the golden child role of like, you know, I'm so sad for you. You're the perfect one. But I think this was like a very humanizing way to portray this, in that like, yeah, like boo-hoo, poor you, because this fucking sucks. Like, all of these roles have drawbacks and painful moments and things that are very isolating and painful and shitty to deal with. But like the overarching message here is that the loneliness and the pain and the suffering gets better when we make space for each other as a family system. We see this like very clearly in the song that Isabela has in the film with her and Mirabel, and like their little embrace and their little hug. It's very cute. And her getting to like fully express herself and be authentic, which was like so cute and like such a fun little moment. Nobody come for me for my voice. I'm not crying yet. I may cry. I'm just losing my voice because I'm talking a lot. So we're going to talk about Luisa next. Her gift is having super strength. A lot of people resonated with Luisa, who are oldest children, because she literally is the parentified child personified. She literally says, who am I if I can't carry it all? And again, if that doesn't encapsulate the role of being like the family rock, I don't know what does. There is a lot of rhetoric and discussion of Luisa carrying the family burdens, both literally and figuratively. We see this in the very beginning of the film, where she has like the sort of twitchy eye because she's very worried. And I think this was a really nice way to talk about what a duality there is in being this person who is the family rock and sort of carrying all of this burdensome weight, because we see in her song, but also like throughout the film, that she does have this very earnest desire to show up for her family and to be of service. She wants to be this person, but it also is suffocating for her, because when you're this person who looks out for everyone, who takes care of everyone, who shoulders the heavy things that other people don't have the strength to shoulder, there's oftentimes a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety that comes along with that. And she sort of talks about this, that like she's fearful of people hurting the family or damage their reputation or hurt the family in some way. And I think this is like very much a moment that people resonated with, because in some ways we can feel grateful and valued in our role, you know, and like being of service. Like I like being of service and I want my family to appreciate me. I like to feel valued. But also, wouldn't it be nice if I could let go of this? And she talks about like wanting to make space for relaxation. And I thought this was just like a really wonderful character to sort of embody both and to be both. Also bonus points for being a body positive queen. I so appreciate that Disney did the thing where we saw a representation of different body types, and not in a kitschy way, not in a way that made a big spectacle out of her. She just is who she is, and she's celebrated for that, and we don't talk about it, you know, like it's not something that has to be like made into a thing. She's just strong and incredible, and like that's just that. So I also loved that.
Bonus points for having the best song.
Yeah, well,
It is.
I don't know about that. I think for me, it was a tie for who I resonated most with between Luisa and Mirabel, who we're going to talk about next. But I'm very curious who you resonated with. If you feel comfortable sharing, I would love for you guys to talk about that in the comments. Like which character you felt most drawn to, or whose family role you felt most like paralleled your life. So let's talk about Mirabel, who is also the sort of black sheep, family scapegoat archetype.
But what's your gift?
But in a little bit of a different way than Bruno. We don't see her being ousted from the family in quite such an obvious way, but we see her being sort of pushed to the edges in the sense of being invisible. She's seen as this sort of like fuck up, but not in the way that Bruno is, where he's drawing negative attention, but more so just that she doesn't live up to the expectations of greatness that all of her siblings do. And I think for me, this was the thing that like fucking punched me right in the heart, is this feeling in families, especially immigrant families or Latina families, where there's this expectation of being this exceptional person, where mediocrity again feels deadly because again your family has survived and persevered against the odds, and so it almost feels disrespectful to dare to be anything less than absolutely fucking incredible as a human being. And so I think her struggle in her song in the beginning of the movie, where she talks about waiting for a miracle and just wanting a chance to be like her family and to be special like all of the other madrigals, was fucking heartbreaking, because again, I think this was an experience that a lot of people resonated with. Yeah, I think they did a great job of representing the loneliness and the fear that comes with that. I really appreciate that during her initial song in the film, we saw this sort of like time stop movement where she's literally alone. Like she's not out singing in the wilderness alone, but like alone in the sense that she's surrounded by family, but she's still alone. And again, I think this is an experience that a lot of people recognized and felt probably fucking punched in the heart by, because it can be a very isolating experience. Like we talked about earlier, in these families where everyone is excelling and everyone is so overwhelmed with their own family role and being, you know, sort of projected upon, it can feel difficult to look outside of our own experience. And so they did a really good job of capturing the anxiety and the shame and the fear that she goes through, and how she is sort of pushed to the fringes. And I also wanted to note too that we saw the sort of desperation that can kind of come along with this family role, where she hears Abuela talk about the miracle being in danger, and she's like, I'm gonna save the miracle. Like she doesn't even fucking blink. She's like, I'm gonna save the miracle. And then she walks to the door and she's like,
Wait, how do I save a miracle?
well, like she doesn't care. She's fucking here for the team, man. Like she just wants to be one of the people. She wants to be special. And so she doesn't care if she has to fucking run off the edge of a goddamn cliff. She's gonna go do it because she wants to be one of the madrigals, which was like, oh, it was a lot. The other thing that I wanted to mention here too is that I'm very happy that they didn't reveal at the end of the film that she actually does have some special gift. And surprise, the gift was like the thing all along. Like, you know, it wasn't like a special reveal at the end, because I think it would have diluted the message of the family finding value in each other as people. We do kind of see her participate in the magic a little bit with the doorknob scene, which we're going to talk about in a minute when we talk about Antonio. But I appreciated that they didn't like, here you go, consolation gift for you. Because I think it's important to drive home this message that her value is not in having a gift or in, you know, being like the other family members. It's just that she's valuable in being Mirabel, and that's it. So let's talk about Dolores. Her gift is the super hearing.
Cousin Dolores can hear a pin.
To me, I know a lot of people were kind of like, meh, like sort of bored by her character. I found her very interesting because she's literally the secret keeper. For a lot of people in large families, this can be a very heavy weight to bear when you are a trusted person, when you are a safe person. I also kind of resonated with this a little bit. This feeling that people will just tell you their secrets and you didn't even ask them to. They just put them on your lap. You're like, well, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this now? And so I think they sort of portrayed her in this way of being sort of caught in the middle all the time. And the result is that she becomes this very quiet, very small, very unassuming person who tries to take up as little space as humanly possible, which can also be a very common feature of people who are like sort of thrust into this role of secret keeper, is that you don't really want to take up this space, but people are forcing you to, and you feel very much like this push and pull of like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what the right answer is, and everyone wants me to help them or to work for them or to be on their side. It's a very overwhelming feeling, and I think they represented how that can cause a person to just shrink and like try not to participate as much as possible. We also see her do this too, like shrinking herself and trying to have as little needs as possible when her sister literally starts to marry the man of her dreams, and she's like, what can you do? That's just the way the madrigals do things. You know, like she doesn't even say anything. She doesn't have a conversation with anybody about it. She just kind of like resigns herself to the fact that she will be miserable and like it's for the good of the family, which was like heartbreaking. Let's talk about Camilo, who is literally the chameleon and like the shapeshifter of the family. I also think there's like a little bit of the sort of like class clown, like jester role thing happening there. They talk about how he wants to make people laugh, and he sort of has this role of like being the sort of funny guy, you know, yeah, haha, good time kind of guy, which is a very common thing for people to use as a coping strategy, especially in families where there is generational trauma. This trope or this role of being like the good time guy is very common for a person who struggles to really like wrap their brain and wrap their arms around the devastating trauma that the family has been through. And so it can be very much a way to cope with the discomfort of that. I am a little bit sad that we didn't get more screen time for him, because I think there's a lot to like flesh out there in terms of how being the chameleon in the family is a disservice to you discovering your authentic self, because you're always sort of shifting who you are and what your presentation is to suit the room, to suit the needs. We see him do this all the time, but I'm glad that they included it because it is very much a part of family roles, and I think they did a good job representing it anyways. Okay, let's talk about Antonio. He's so cute. He's also one of my favorites. His power is that he speaks to animals.
I understand you.
I love him because he's adorable, and also because he loves Mirabel the most, so I love him for that. But I also, just like from a clinical lens, my suspicion or my guess is that his character was supposed to represent this role of cycle breaker. Not in a very on-the-nose way or in an intentional way, but I think it's worth noting that he literally speaks a different language than the rest of the family. He speaks to animals and he sort of communicates in this way and like understands things that the family doesn't. Also very common for cycle breakers to be the youngest person in the family, because you're not quite so entrenched in these family roles that everybody else is. Typically the oldest children are the most entrenched because they are the ones who are like in closest proximity to the original trauma and therefore like forced to participate in this family structure out of a necessity and like need for survival. And so the vibes that I picked up from him were very much sort of like starting a new era, because I also think it's worth noting that he was instrumental in every single scene in the movie where there was a big change that happened. He was present for, and like pretty necessary in Mirabel finding and discovering that Bruno was still living in the house.
The rats told me everything.
He was also like there when they were talking about Bruno having a vision. He was like, use my room. Like,
You can do this.
very much he was there for all the things. He was also the one who handed Mirabel the doorknob after they finished rebuilding Casita. And so there's like, he's a central character in all of these like very transformative moments in the family and how the family like perceives one another, but in a very like understated way, which I appreciated. A lot of times in real life, cycle breakers are cast in this role of like scapegoat, black sheep, like we don't like you because you're a disruptor and you're fucking up our shit. And so I appreciated that they didn't drag us through this like very emotionally traumatizing journey. I think putting Antonio in this role in the film was a nice way to sort of portray what a cycle breaker can look like in terms of creating change within the family without it being like maybe so, you know, conflict wrought. But just for what it's worth, if you are a cycle breaker in your own family, it's very normal, very okay for there to be conflict and pushback from family of origin, because families naturally gravitate towards something called homeostasis, which just means like staying the same. My favorite way to explain homeostasis is that our bodies do it with our body temperature. Doesn't matter if it's cold outside or hot outside, your body tends to run like 98.6, right? Your body tends to gravitate towards this temperature for the good of your body's system. Family systems do the same. We're very resistant to change within family systems because it's uncomfortable, because it's scary, because we don't know anything different. And so when there's a cycle breaker, the tendency is to like push you back down in your place, and it's very scary and like shitty. So if that's not your experience, that's okay. But regardless, I thought Antonio was like a very cute little representation of like hope and renewal, and I appreciated his inclusion in the film. Coffee bucket.
You're doing great, babe.
Thank you. Old detective.
Yeah, keen observation. Did you catch that the first time you watched that? Or?
Using the old fucking noggin.
I know.
No, I think that was watch through number 3.
Okay.
Yeah, y'all, I've watched this film like 3.5 times now, by the way. Not even just for research, mostly just because I really like it. So let's talk about the film generally, but also this scene where we find out what actually happened to Abuelo and like the trauma that Abuela has been through, because it fucking wrecked me.
Oruguitas paran el viento.
And I wanted to talk about it for that reason, but also because I think this was such an important moment to portray in the film. The song and like the sequence that they play touched me on a personal level, but I also was really happy that they included it because I think it's a great representation of what familial trauma and generational trauma looks like, especially in the way that we see this. I don't want to cry talking about it, but especially in the way that we see this very stark change in the way that Abuela holds herself, and she talks about how she thought that she would be a different woman, and then she survives this thing that is like life-changing, earth-shattering, traumatizing, and we see her start to do this thing where she puts her little shawl on and she like puts her shoulders back.
En dos capullos.
I was given a miracle. A second chance.
And embodies this posture of like a sort of stiff upper lip, very strong, like very like no nonsense, no room for emotions kind of woman. And this is very much an experience that people who are from immigrant families or families of color have experienced. And I was so happy that they showed this. And this is why I say the thing that I say to my clients and to you guys on this channel, that it is very much possible to honor that parents and family and like family of origin can be people who have traumatized you, who have behaved in ways that are absolutely inappropriate and not excusable, not something that we can write off or label as okay ever, and also people that we can humanize and that we can understand on a human level and that we can still love and have relationships with. I think it's very important for us to honor the gray area here, especially from a cultural competency point of view. I very much want to encourage anybody who is a therapist, a prospective therapist, at all involved in the mental health field to watch this film. And I mean, obviously to like educate yourself about cultural competency generally, but I think this film is a great visual representation of that, because when we approach boundary setting and trauma healing from this very white point of view, we can miss the cultural context there. And especially in Latin families and in families of color, there is a more collectivist approach. There's not quite this like fierce individuality that exists in white families and in American families. And so when you, as a clinician, come in swinging with this approach to boundary setting about like this very firm, very like hard lines in the sand kind of ideal, not only are you disrespecting your client's culture, but you're missing the fucking point. And I think it really highlights how nuanced and complex this issue is. And so I was really happy that we got to see Abuela in this very humanizing way, where she was like this very silly and happy young woman. Ugh, I don't want to cry. No more crying on the channel. She was this like very silly and happy young woman who just wanted to marry the man of her dreams and have her cute little triplets.
Llenas de hambre, siguen andando y navegando un mundo que cambia y sigue cambiando.
But because of the trauma that she survived, her life pivoted direction. And again, I think it's important to honor it here too, that healing from that trauma and even recognizing that this is a trauma and having the language to describe something as trauma is sometimes a privilege. And I think in this film specifically, we kind of saw that represented, that she didn't understand that that's what she was doing until Mirabel and the family sort of forced her to be held accountable for that. And thankfully, because it's a Disney movie, she saw the error of her ways and was like, oh my God, and like, I didn't mean it. And like, they had this wonderful healing moment.
He said to me, you.
But again, I really wanted to highlight like this sequence because I thought it was like really an integral piece of the plot in the film, but also like a really important thing for us to talk about in terms of generational trauma and like family healing. So I think that's pretty much all the stuff that I have to address and unpack. I know that there's a lot. It's a very complex film and there's a lot to unpack here. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions in the comments. Please definitely let me know who you resonated with if you feel comfortable to do that, which is generally leave me your thoughts and opinions. Let me know if there's something that you noticed that I didn't notice, because I would love to have just this sort of open conversation about it in the comments. I could talk about this film all day, clearly. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Like the video if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. We make content like this, but also a cute little educational moment. And then share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. Oh, also turn on notification bells. And I will see you next Saturday. Okay, bye.